Get mine. Get mine. Well, I'll call the Monday, November 3rd, 2014 regular meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission to order. As is our custom, we reserve a few minutes at the beginning of each meeting for public comment, and the public may comment on any matter except items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. We generally limit that to 3 minutes, and I see we have one form, and so with that, I'll just go ahead and call Christine Thompson up. Please state your name and address. And yes, sit right here and speak into the microphone, please.
Hey. Hello, I'm Christine Thompson, 2195 Olive Street, campus planner, but I'm actually here as a neighbor and a band board member. So this is about the Willamette Code project that you're working on, and I know it's not today, but I have been unable to attend. So I understand it's coming up next week, which I'll be out of town as well. So I put forward to you a request to more carefully look at the area that is north of 24th Avenue on Willamette Street. This is part of the proposed zone that currently is proposed for 60 feet in height. This is the residential area on the west side of the street. That represents an increase of 10 feet. And I ask you to do this for a number of reasons. There's a notable shift in the character of the street, the uses along the street, and the adjacent neighborhood. This area that's north of 24th Avenue is residential. It's not commercial. So there's a notable change in use. The existing allowed height is 50 feet, not 120. And so it's not being lowered in height like most of the zone. It's being increased. And this, in my opinion, seems to be the one place where you might consider actually further decreasing it, given prior examples in other neighborhoods where moratoriums have been placed in old-style zoning where there's not enough of a differentiation or compatibility with heights for R1 zones next to higher density zoning. There's also an adjacent College Hill neighborhood that's a vital and notable character defining area of campus. It's my world, of the city. It's a very notable change in topography. What that means is when you build a taller structure in this area, it not only affects the immediate neighbors, but the entire neighborhood. So if you're going to have an increase in height, you have to think about the area you're affecting. Also, it creates some challenging access issues for automobiles. The other element that's unique in this particular zone between 22nd and 24th is the proposed buffer area between the higher density residential and R1 it's a 10-foot alley versus a street. So it's a much closer area between the two types of uses. The development and the auto access, which as I understand is proposed via the alley, will be much closer to the adjacent R1 lots, and in particular the private backyards versus front yards. It would be helpful to know, maybe as you think about this, why this area was included in the study in general, because it ends at 22nd, which bisects a definable neighborhood. So what you do here is unusual because it's in the middle of a zone of what would be defined as College Hill. I can't speak for other neighbors, and I haven't gone and done a poll or anything of that sort. But I will say I would not assume that their silence means that they're okay with this. The few that I have spoken with, about a dozen that I've informally spoken with, first imagine I'm referring to the 3-lane, 4-lane. Then when we get past that, they finally maybe have heard of this, but assume, of course, it has nothing to do with their neighborhood and that it's the commercial zone. And when they finally hear that, 5 stories, meaning not the old 5 stories, but 60 feet would be allowed in their backyard, of course, they're not very supportive, as you can imagine, and in fact wonder, is this an opportunity to further assess, perhaps even going a little lower, so that you actually do protect the character of this neighborhood. I guess I just ask you to very thoughtfully do this, and I realize you have a big task before you. It's been daunting. The few meetings that I've sat in on are just unbelievable. So I realize this is a big area, but in particular, this is a unique zone that maybe merits a bit more attention from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Any yes.
I would just ask Robin if you could have staff comment on that next week at our meeting.
Yeah.
Next week?
Yes, next Monday.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. You have anything written for us?
No, these are my notes that
Oh,
you really
okay.
don't want.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And just to note that we did bring this up
Right.
at a prior
Yeah.
meeting.
Right, and I was...
It has come up in part of our discussion, so.
Yeah.
Yes, and I cannot, Macs are not conducive to watching the videos.
Oh, yeah.
I am unable to do so.
Well, this was brought up at one of our meetings.
Sure.
And
Thank you
we
very
did have a pretty thorough discussion, and I think we almost came to consensus that we were going to have it lower than
Do something,
that.
yeah.
Whether that has come back in the staff report yet, we don't know yet, but there
And-
was...
I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
It seemed to me like
Yeah.
there was close to consensus that we
Okay.
would keep that at a lower height level because of the topography and the uses.
And that's what I recall also. And then I think, do we have an open house? Is it this Thursday? Is there an open house or not?
No,
I had a tentative on my calendar.
was a prior schedule. We haven't scheduled the next open house yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay,
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak? I don't have any other green slips. Okay. With that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the appeal of the planning director decision for Van Slyke, John and Payung, if I'm saying that correctly. Z14-5, it's our action. We have the final order before us, and we have had the opportunity to make comments on it. I think Commissioner Mills made one comment. I had one typo that I found. The other commissioners have any? Commissioner Taylor, are you?
He's not allowed.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I
She says time out.
I forgot. This is still
That's good.
part of
Thought
your
maybe you got a
recusal.
timeout from
My
planning
apologies. My apologies. I thought you were mad at us or something. No. I'm sorry. Okay, Commissioner Borowski.
I read the edits that were sent out from Commissioner Mills, and I would be fine with those. I'm just wondering, are those reflected in here? Okay.
They are.
Yes,
Okay, then.
they are, and I agree. I thought that was a good
Yep.
further to
It was
keep it
very
from
good
being
without
big.
any
Yeah.
edits, so
Yeah.
compliments to the staff.
I'm
Commissioner
good.
Duncan, you're good. Commissioner Jaworski? Okay. Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the final order.
So moved.
Commissioner Mills, second. Commissioner Jaworski, any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay. Motion carries. Final order, I will sign.
Great.
Timeout's over.
And now Commissioner Taylor may rejoin us. My apologies.
Out of the penalty box.
So that's all you need? Thank you. You're welcome. Okay. Get my agenda back up here. Not coming up very fast. Let me read yours. I'm sorry. Next item is Envision Eugene UGB expansion for jobs, parks, and schools. And we have Terry and Zach again with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Planning Commissioners. This is really an extension of our October 27th recommendation that focused primarily on the proposed UGB expansion boundary and the plan designations. So this today we'll be looking more closely at the zoning recommendations and the associated overlays to be applied in the area that would implement both kind of UGB associated things as well as reflect our code requirements for handling lands outside of the urban growth boundary. I know there was a lot of discussion focused on development feasibility as well as wetlands mitigation, and we'll get to that within the presentation towards the end, whenever we get to large lot, the large lot portfolio, which you'll remember was depicted with the kind of bubble diagram last week. So my comments will address those questions in that latter half of the presentation. We'll go over the jobs recommendation just as a refresher for anybody who was not in attendance last week. Although all of you are here, of course, reiterate those plan designations, hit the zone changes and the overlays, and then, as I said, the large site portfolio. We'll discuss the feasibility and the wetlands mitigation. Just as a refresher, a reminder, the area, this is our study area wedged in between the airport and Highway 99 and the existing industrial development on Airport Road. Areas north of Clear Lake, which bisect the area here as I'm tracing with the cursor, are proposed for light medium industrial designation. The area south of Clear Lake we're proposing as campus industrial. Again, apologies for the projector. This doesn't depict as well as it does on screen or in print. So that's that gray coloring is the campus industrial. Bethel Schools contain about 55 acres, 54 on the western edge of the study area, and the future Golden Gardens on the south totals 222 acres. As we mentioned last week, there are still 2 areas that are undecided at this time. What's shown here, the red square, as we currently are depicting as commercial. That's 1 acre, and are still meeting with and talking to the property owners here. What's listed as TBD, to be determined. And we're leaning towards a recommendation for campus industrial at this time, as you heard last week. Are there any questions now that I know you've had a week to think on that? We can stop here for questions if you'd like.
Commissioner Duncan.
Just at some point, I'd like to have a little more discussion about the campus industrial zoning classification. And you tell me wherever that's appropriate to have that discussion. I can wait.
I think it's the next slide.
Oh, okay.
That seems appropriate.
I won't get rid of my trash yet.
Okay.
Well, while we're still on this slide, the 1 acre parcel, I mean, yeah, I understand the issue here. We've got 1 acre and an existing use and those types of things. Would the uses that they're proposing not fit into campus industrial?
They would not at this. No, they would not. And I'll touch on this more in some subsequent slides. But the commercial use and the implementing zone below the commercial plan designation allow for what's listed in our code as horticulture.
Right.
And you'll hear in the later explanation that's not included within E1, the zone that implements campus industrial. So this is an attempt to keep the current.
But as an
property
existing
owner
use, they
whole.
could keep doing it, correct?
They could
existing use, yes.
under agricultural zoning.
Okay.
Certainly.
Okay.
So there's some iterations of zoning that we'll move through.
So then my other question is if we make this one little area, I guess I would have to say, are there other lots near that corner or that intersection that it would make sense to make it more of just, instead of just one property there, make it an actual neighborhood commercial zone? Mm-hmm. Because to me, it feels like we're writing code for these people. Mm-hmm. And that if you're across the street and you're saying, well, wait, I didn't know, because I could have liked that. So that's just my thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if the parcels, if it would screw up your parcel designations or what, but perhaps that could be a small neighborhood commercial zone for that whole corner.
Your thinking's consistent with what we've been thinking all along, and that's part of what the gray dotted kind of stylized circles are. They designate what we think would be ideal locations for neighborhood commercial within this larger employment center. The only difference is, is that we don't have small parcels anywhere else except on that one quadrant of a future potential intersection. So the I-2 under the light medium industrial and the E1 under the campus industrial would both allow for commercial development, and we think it makes sense around that intersection. It's just that the other lots around that intersection are 30, 40, 50 acres.
So I just add to that, the reason we don't want to show additional commercial on the four corners is that we try to avoid split plan designations on a parcel. It's messy, and it kind of presupposes a land division that hasn't been proposed by anybody. And we're bringing these properties in for their largeness, and so we do have additional work to do to get in place the direction, whether it's in a refinement plan policy or something that gets adopted with the UGB and comprehensive plan that expressly depicts that intent to allow commercial uses at this corner, to direct commercial uses at this corner, and facilitate that through zoning. But at the plan designation level, that was the thinking. Recognize existing parcel lines and sizes and reflect that with the map.
Commissioner Mills.
And I was just going to say, with that, you accept some risk, of course, that, these parcels are not going to develop in a manner that allows for commercial on each corner, which is what we would ideally envision, because, depending upon the land available, the water, the water resource, how they handle that, you may or may not get that. But certainly the zoning, as you guys envision and I understand, would allow it. So I think you're on the right course.
I think that's fair, yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah. So it's been my understanding, if that's the intent that you're going to articulate within, let's say, a refinement plan or another,
Be sure and speak into the microphone.
within a refinement plan or some other plan other than the comprehensive plan. So are you then saying that it could be a possibility that someone could actually partition off that corner and apply for, it would have to be a metro plan amendment, at least a text or a map amendment to actually have that commercial, or are you just saying you're encouraging the E2 allowed commercial uses to be on those corners?
Good questions, and the topic of the subcommittee meeting next Monday. So we haven't written it yet, but I think that's one way it could go. And as that kind of gets to the zones that we need to develop for this area, we'll talk more about that. It's a matter of what's the right tool, how do we get it in the code so that it clearly expresses the city's intent, but also preserves flexibility for this area to develop as property owners see fit.
Okay.
And yeah, we aren't quite to that step yet.
Okay. Thank you.
And I guess I just had one question or comment then, just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. The other three corners are all large parcels currently.
They are correct.
And this is the only smaller parcel, and so this is a recognition of the existing use of the smaller parcel to allow that to continue in that as far as the horticulture. But those other three corners, as part of larger parcels, A, you don't want to split zone those, and B, the commercial uses are still permitted with as an ancillary use within those zones, and so that's kind of the thinking.
That's
even though, as
correct.
Commissioner Mills said, that may not get to kind of what we're
The
hoping
first
happens
priority
there,
here, as
but-
I understand it, is employment, for these parcels, and then the commercial definitely is there. But I guess as I'm thinking is, for an individual parcel to develop, there's going to be a buyer or an employer that's going to want to have it a certain way to meet their needs, and they're usually pretty. There could very well be commercial developed here, but we're not guaranteeing that, and I'm not suggesting that we should.
Right.
I think you can make an allowance for it to happen and encourage it, but in the end, these parcels have got to develop for the benefit of the city at large, which is for employment. So.
Right. Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I guess that's the final clarification. I understand the 1 acre and the thoughts behind that. In the 1 acre commercial, is there something more additionally allowed than in the commercial in the campus industrial?
Potentially, yes.
There are differences that they could have in there. So that's one of the reasons doing it now, then, in addition. Okay, thanks.
Okay. We'll move along to today's topic, which is
Zoning.
the zoning that we're proposing with this overall UGB package. As I stated before, the area north of Clear Lake, I've just zoomed in here so we can get it in a little more detail. The area north of Clear Lake Road we're proposing is light medium industrial designation, and that is implemented through our I-2 zone. The important piece of the puzzle that's at play here is that our urban growth boundary will be moved, but we're not proposing to annex anything at this time. And therefore, these properties will be outside city limits, but inside the urban growth boundary. And the city and the county have an agreement that when that arrangement exists, the city implements the code and the land development regulations and the zoning. And we have to use our zones, not the county zones. So currently, this entire area is zoned E40, exclusive farm use at a 40-acre minimum lot size. We would propose to change this to I-2. As I mentioned earlier, I-2 does include the horticultural uses, which are row crops, livestock, grazing, everything else you can imagine that would fit there. And that keeps the current operations in this area whole because there's a lot of grass seed and a fair amount of grazing that goes on. So we feel like rather than just making the switch from exclusive farm use to the city's ag zone, we could actually kind of remove one of the eventual steps in the process and go ahead and jump to the I-2.
And is the I-2 then a county zone also?
No, this is
Yes,
this is the city's I-2 zone.
Okay. Even though it's outside
Even though it's
the city
outside the
limits
city
and not
limits.
annexed. Okay.
If you want to get into more detail, it's actually called the Urban Transition Area Code, and it is adopted by Lane County, and then we implement it.
And the
But it's
idea
effectively the UTA, the Urban Transition Area Code, mimics or mirrors the city's current code.
And so the idea there is then when a particular property would annex, that property owner would still have to do the annexation, but they would not have to then subsequently do a zone change.
That's correct.
Okay.
We're just removing that step in the future development process.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I guess, again, and this may come up in a later slide, and I'm sure it will, but so you said it was E40, so they can't break it down in less than 40-acre plots as of right now.
Currently, that's correct.
But in I-2, they can break it down
to 2 acres, and that's that list of overlays addresses that. So I'll get there in just a moment.
So I figured, but I just thought I'd bring it up.
So the /UL you see there begins a list of overlays that will be necessary in this area. The UL is urbanizable land, and that is what directs people to use the Urban Transition Area Code that the city then implements. At the time of annexation, that UL disappears effectively as part of the annexation agreement. The CAS is commercial airport safety, and that is a very large overlay that reaches east into the Santa Clara neighborhood, south beyond Willow Creek and the Hynex area. So all the properties in this area will also have that overlay. There's a host of regulations that are associated with that about reflective rooftops and particular uses you can't do just to maintain safety around the airport. What we're calling /CL, the Clear Lake, is specific to this area and will limit subdivision in some way to ensure that we implement our large site needs, as we talked about last week. And we'll get into that in more detail in a few slides, but that's what it'll look like. And then the /WQ is for water quality, and that's an existing overlay on the books that allows for the different things that we talked about last week when doing on-site stormwater retention in a kind of sensitive manner rather than the gray piping, concrete piping of stormwater, instead going with a green infrastructure approach that could be on-site mitigation, wetlands mitigation on-site, and probably enhancement of that central channel that shows up here, kind of arcing through this area. Currently, that's the only area that we're proposing the WQ overlay, so that would be applied just to those properties through which that channel cuts.
Commissioner Duncan.
I started reviewing the wetland study that you sent us, Terry.
This one?
Yeah, that one. And in there was a discussion about this CAS. Does the FAA have any power over mitigation, because it talks about attraction of waterfowl and that type of habitat and the problems it causes? If someone goes to mitigate wetlands on site, does the FAA become the third group that gets to tell us how that can occur, along with DSL and the Corps?
In our previous discussions, there's been no mention of, with airport staff, there's been no mention of the FAA getting involved in local land use decisions.
But if somebody decides to start mitigating on site, which is what I expect a lot will probably do, I guess we should know if that all of a sudden is going to have the FAA as our best friend helping us, telling us how they're going to mitigate and what it is, because, again, it's already, we know it's going to be costly, and adding another agency in on top can add a lot more cost, and it might be the sort of final stick that breaks the camel's back. And we get through all this sort of like we've had issues before in other areas. We don't want to get through this whole thing and find out that they have some overriding concern and control over what we do within those overlay areas.
We haven't heard that they're a reviewing agency, but we'll definitely look into it, and it hasn't come up, I don't think, in the West Virginia Wetlands Plan either. My guess is that it comes up through the DSL's review, that they're checking for those sorts of things, but we'll look into it.
Yeah, because if we obviously intensify or if we enhance wetlands to pick up additional credits,
Right.
we bring in the waterfowl.
We do know from our conversations with airport staff that they are very supportive of our goal not to increase net increase of open water impoundments because of that bird strike issue. So we're taking the approach that we're collaborating with them. They're going to be updating their airport master plan very soon in the next year while we're implementing this plan. So we're working together with them, and can ask them your question about the FAA, but they're running into very similar issues with property that they own,
Right.
where they want to site the hotel, for instance, and so they have very recent direct experience with that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
We'll look into that. If there's any other questions on the northern half, no? We'll jump ahead to the southern half. Because of the prior question, you've already heard the explanation, but south of Clear Lake, just like the commercial designation, the campus industrial also does not allow horticultural uses, nor does the parks and open space or the government and education designation. However, the city, Bethel, and the private landowners immediately south of Clear Lake all have some sort of grazing operation and leasing that encompasses agricultural uses on that site. So we're not proposing to make the zone changes south of Clear Lake, the zone changes that would implement the campus industrial, government and education, or parks and open space. And that's, again, an attempt to just keep the current operations whole, not make anybody non-conforming or just raise complications for the existing agricultural uses on site. And then again, the urbanizable land, the commercial airport safety, Clear Lake expansion overlay, and the water quality overlay would all be applied in a similar manner.
Commissioner Duncan.
Okay, now I'll ask my campus industrial. But first, why not go ahead with parks and open space? Because doesn't the city already own that property? And it's
They do.
why leave it AG if it's already city-owned land and they want to put it there? Is it being farmed?
It is. They've got leases
Okay.
out to different folks for grazing and grass seed. And I know there's grazing. I know there's sheep out there. We've heard that.
And a lot of geese. But we'll work with them to see what their preferred timing is. Bethel School District as well. We anticipate those will be the first two properties that we'll want to annex, and we'll work with them to get the zoning in place, probably concurrent with annexation, but whatever makes sense.
Okay. As you know, I've kind of expressed somewhat of a concern about campus industrial in this area. And so I pulled the allowable uses table for E1, and I asked my two business partners to go through this list and sort of say, you know, if we're trying to limit this to a 10 or even more, a 20 or I think there's even a 50-acre piece in here, if I remember correctly. 50, a 20, a 10, a 20, a 30, and a 50. I asked them to go through the list as I did, and we found that in our minds, E1 does not really lend itself to large lot development. If we looked at the list, we actually came up, I mean, Information Technology Service, maybe. We went through these with the idea of what size buildings does people construct and what do they use and how do they use them, and most all of them end up being smaller buildings or office types. So the Information Technology Service, again, maybe somebody comes in and wants a larger facility there, but most of those really are small support type uses. They even call them services. And so we ended up with food and beverage production, which possibly would be big enough. Yeah. And the only other one that we came up with was administrative, general, and professional offices or scientific and educational research centers. That's the only three uses that I found in here that I could even remotely suggest would go on a larger lot. So I'm a little concerned that if we do this, we end up with a really nice area that's zoned really nicely that nobody wants to move into because the lots are too large. Because even on a 10-acre site, you're talking about somebody building 100 to 150,000 square foot facility. And these uses don't fit into that other than maybe food production. And I don't know that, to me, it's like we're trying to put all of our eggs in that proverbial one basket that's food production. Now, again, if that's what we want to go there, maybe, but I'm a little concerned that the E1's too limiting for big lots. Because if you take a look at 20 or 30 acres, you're talking about probably buildings, a 30-acre parcel, it wouldn't be unreasonable to have 5 to 7 acres worth of buildings on that. You know, and that's 200 to 350,000 square feet of building on that, and these uses don't work on those things. And I don't see us having multi-tenant type facilities.
Yeah.
So I just put this up on the screen so we could look at
Right.
this. That 50-acre site on the south side of Clear Lake has been bugging me too. I'm trying to figure out what to do about it because, as you know, we have an identified site need portfolio of certain sizes, and you can't really mix and match them very easily.
Right.
And so I think this will be a question of how solid of a case we're able to make for that. Because I don't know, maybe DLCD will say, well, you're right, that makes more sense to make that E1, and it should be 2 smaller lots. And maybe that requires, I'm just playing this out a little bit, maybe that requires us to amend our economic opportunities analysis, because this portfolio is based on the economic opportunities analysis, which states we need this many of that size. And so if we decide we can't find it or it's not suitable in this location, then we have some backtracking to do, but I don't know that it's undoable.
Well, but couldn't it be, instead of having the campus industrial zone, we look at a different zone? I mean, that's my concern, is the zoning to me is the limiting factor. And I'm concerned that the sizes don't bother me. It's the uses that are allowed in E1 that bother me when I look at parcel sizes, because
It's kind of a combination of the two, though.
well, I mean, the parcel size, if this was I2, I'd have no problems. Or maybe even to a certain extent, I'd have to go back through and look at E2.
I was wondering about E2.
Yeah, but E1 I think it's way too limiting for large parcel development. I mean, unless we expect to see another hospital be built out there, or a prison. I think a prison's allowed in E1, but I'm going to guess we're not going to get either one of those, or a hospital.
That's not our best outcome, no.
No.
I hear what you're saying, and I think this is a good thing for the subcommittee to tackle, because we can play out a couple different scenarios and ways to deal with this, given that review that you did of the uses with your contacts. So I appreciate the information, but I think we should save most of that for the subcommittee meeting,
And then
which is next Monday.
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, and mine was just kind of piling on a little bit, but I guess that the study that was done, did that have large parcel E1 type in it, or was it?
Yes, I mean, there are examples of the types of uses that are allowed in E1, and there's a huge range of parcel sizes that these companies can demand. So it's a wide open question. I'd have to open in the economic opportunities analysis to get that data, but it's a big range.
To be talked about. Okay. To be talked about.
To be talked about, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I think that's Commissioner Duncan's brought up an interesting subject. I guess my only thing I would say for possible consideration is when the committee looks at this with staff, that maybe instead of the whole area being campus industrial, that it be split rather than saying it has to be a total different zone, because I would much prefer to see campus industrial next to the residential on the east and the school on the west. And I don't know what that 50-acre parcel looks like, but that alone could be what you need for the larger change zone. So you have campus industrial, something else, and then campus industrial again, sort of buffering those east-west uses, since that's right in the middle and wouldn't be hitting anyone.
So get parcel specific.
Yeah, make that one. I'm just saying as a consideration. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm assuming it hits the road and you can access it or whatever.
Okay.
Mr. Borowski.
Yeah, for me, I think the way that I saw this playing out was we're using zoning as transitioning, and the conflict comes in. You're using zoning as transitioning, but we're doing the UGB expansion to justify jobs and employment, and so you've got to say, are we doing it for jobs? And can you get a 50-acre? Can you get the jobs on that 50 acres using that zoning? And so maybe there's a better way of doing the transition, perhaps like Commissioner Jaworski suggested. But when in every presentation that I saw coming up to this, it was like, yeah, we're going to use campus industrial as our transitioning, as somebody last week mentioned, a kinder, gentler zoning. Wasn't that how it was? A different parcel was brought up, and so I would just be concerned that we're trying to be kinder and gentler, but we're not going to get the jobs that we need out of it.
There may be other tools that we can incorporate to accomplish the same goals. So the buffering, the transition in land use, the face to the park. This is along the new extension of Fiona, which is a huge amount of linear feet of park frontage. And so the typical I-2 is not very landscape rich, and so we may be able to accomplish some of those goals with the Clear Lake overlay that hasn't been written yet, and do it that way. Yeah, good suggestion.
So that actually gives me a nice segue if we want to go back to the Clear Lake overlay. We had discussed this earlier, just as a means to implement this bubble diagram, what we're calling our large site portfolio. But the CL Clear Lake overlay also is probably the best tool that we have to implement some of the environmental justice issues that we heard in prior meetings. So it could be that the transition doesn't need to be through zoning, but we can still get to effectively the transitioning through the Clear Lake overlay. That is one of those topics we want to discuss in more detail with the subcommittee, is what things come out of that environmental justice report and are housed within the Clear Lake expansion overlay. So if you do direct a change in the zoning, there may be other things that we need to do with the overlay. So that's appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Borowski.
Commissioner Mills, I think, had a comment.
Just a quick question, and that is, you mentioned using a Clear Lake overlay to address some of these issues. Is there a refinement plan in this area?
No, there's not, and we're not sure we need to create one.
Yeah, okay.
But we do need a place to house some of these issues that have come up and document the thinking behind all of the process that we've gone through. So I'd say that's to be determined, but at this point we're looking at the overlay as the most direct way to implement the goals of all the studies that have led us to this point. I'd hate to do a refinement plan just to have a refinement plan.
I understand.
If we're already implementing it through the zoning and the overlays.
And to make sure that I understand the purpose of the Clear Lake overlay, it's to limit the subdividing of property into smaller parcels at some level of acreage that we've not maybe determined yet, because the campus industrial does allow, did I hear 2 acre?
I think I2 is 2 acres,
and
campus industrial, campus employment is 10,
and so
or maybe 2 also. I'm not very small, much smaller than our
much smaller
large
than what we're
lot.
wanting to do here. And so the Clear Lake overlay would maintain a certain minimum lot size for that, so we don't get them subdivided into really small parcels.
Correct. We're still in the process of doing the research to see how that best plays out from a regulatory standpoint. There's kind of 2 ends of the continuum. Do we adopt this map and say it has to follow it, very black and white, or is it a first come first serve and we check the boxes as a 10 acre comes in, we check it off. So we're still working through how that's implemented, how best that's implemented, but that is one of the 2 prongs that the Clear Lake overlay will take.
Okay.
Large lot and the environmental justice issue in some way.
Okay.
And it looks like perhaps transitioning.
And I saw Commissioner Jaworski first, then Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I understand that the 2 that you just cited there, Zach. But I also thought I heard a third from Terry indicating, I know that if there would have been a refinement plan in this area, which there isn't, you could take a look at those 2 commercial circled areas and just put something in the refinement plan that says we'd like to see commercial up in this area. Right. And it can be vague and it's not site specific. Mm-hmm. Did I hear you say that you may be able to do that in the Clear Lake overlay?
That's right. I think it would be possible.
All right, good.
It's just a matter of crafting language that gives enough guidance and enough clarity, but enough flexibility in finding that balance in writing code is difficult. But that's what we'll go for.
Okay, so there's more than 2 then. There's 3 things that the Clear Lake overlay could do. Good. I just wanted to make it clear.
To be determined.
Sure. Commissioner Borowski.
Well, this kind of goes to your, how are we going to, is it going to be first come, first serve, or a prescribed, this piece of land has to have a 70 acre. I don't think I'm all right with that type of prescription to people's lands, because what may happen is somebody may find 2 parcels down below and put them together to get to 80 acres. If you put the 60 and a 20 and a 10 and combine them, you've got 90 acres, and you've checked a box. And then you've got the guy up there by the airport who's stuck with a 70 acre thing, and we have a need for 10 and 20 acre parcels. So I would be concerned about that. Mm-hmm. I would lean towards flexibility, but yet not so much flexibility that it's a tough call, because you say, okay, well, you can split that 70 up and then plan on compiling. I don't know. Maybe after one's compiled, you could check the large one off, type of deal. I don't know how that would work, but I would lean towards some sort of flexibility there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We share your concerns, and I was just presenting those as kind of the 2 ends of the continuum of just first come, first serve, or a very prescriptive approach, and there's got to be somewhere in the middle that we land, while ensuring that we get the large lots, right, because that's our justification for expansion.
It's interesting. I know we're going to bring this to subcommittee. I was just going to add that, to some degree, that first come, first serve does allow flexibility. It makes code writing more difficult. But anyway, so I just wanted to note that, that if there's an opportunity on several smaller lots, it just means that the code writing for that larger lot allows potential partitioning for that lot for smaller parcels, because it's been met on a multi-parcel lot. But then how do you ensure that that multi-parcel lot maintains that larger kind of use? Does that make sense? So anyways, it's an interesting challenge.
Okay.
One more question. So then, I guess I'm not real familiar with the overlay process. So how is that? Can you amend that? Can a property owner come in down the road and ask for is there a zone change? I mean, how does that work down 15 years from now,
Right.
when you've got a piece of property that's sat empty for 15 years and somebody wants to go in and use it, but the overlay prescribes it as being no? What is
So
that
the
process?
Overlay would be added to our code as a new overlay that is applicable only in this area. So they're citing criteria to apply this overlay, and so it would be required for all properties in this area. They couldn't come down the road 15 years later and say, I want out of this overlay, because they'd be required under the code, under the very existence of this overlay, to abide by the rules of that overlay. I mean, it's similar to any other code tool. Somebody could petition to change it, and we could look into that, but it's a big lift.
It would be like a Metro Plan amendment, right?
A code amendment,
Or
which is a
code amendment.
type 5 city council decision.
But it could be amended.
Sure.
It could.
Sure.
I think you would just trigger equity issues also if you're surrounded by other property owners that are subject to it in this larger, that were born out of this larger community-based planning process.
Commissioner Duncan.
Yeah, I don't believe statewide planning goes, and this is sort of a question but a statement, because I've been involved in this a lot. The reason we set up large lots is to best truly guess what hopefully we could use in the future. If for some reason we had two sightings come in at wanted 80 acres, and the third one shows up and says, I need 140 acres, we're not going to ask them to leave Eugene and go find another place to take their jobs. So I want to, that's to me also very important, that if we do get something here and we actually create like a food hub or whatever, that we have to recognize we're going to have to make this flexible enough to support large siting. And I'm real sure that statewide planning economic goals allow us to do that. And we can't come in here and say, well, gee, we've checked off the 275, so sorry, we don't get any more. That's not how it's written. It allows us to do that. And if we never use a 10 or a 15 or a 20 because we've used it all up, hallelujah, then we figure out how to go add the smaller ones we need somewhere else. So this is not we have to check off the boxes for each of those sizes, and you only get so many. So we have to be flexible enough to do that, too.
Sounds like a good problem to have.
I hope that's our problem.
Yeah.
So the last two topics I just wanted to cover within this particular slide go back to the development feasibility questions that were asked last week and the wetlands mitigation. We had conducted a pretty simple development feasibility analysis that looked at analogous parcels that were within the UGB and that had services and what their property values were, and then essentially applied those to certain parcels outside, within this study area. And it was really an attempt to determine feasibility of developing a site with the wetland encumbrances that come with mitigation costs. So it's combining the property values with the mitigation costs and attempting to kind of back into our large site needs and how best to accommodate the large site needs, while recognizing that at some point you're going to reach this tipping point where it just doesn't financially make sense to continue to fill wetlands. In order, you'll stop and just build with whatever your highest, your high and dry land availability is. So I don't really have any numbers for you. I don't know that those are pertinent. Really, the most important numbers are kind of these bubbles. And what is relevant, though, is moving forward to the ESEE analysis, what Commissioner Duncan referred to as the wetlands report. This was the consultant's attempt to, again, kind of take the more detailed wetlands identification layers that were compiled by our wetlands consultant and take our kind of rough feasibility analysis and look at how property owners or future development could get up to the site needs that our employment or our economic opportunity analysis said were expected and needed in the city of Eugene. So what you're seeing are in blue areas that the consultants viewed as desirable or I guess locally significant wetlands that are most likely to be avoided and effectively protected, required protection through the Division of State Lands at the state level, and also the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who get involved in wetlands issues. And the tan areas are the consultants, essentially their best guess based on the development feasibility analysis and the quality of the wetlands out here. Their best guess at which ones would be allowed, which little pieces of wetlands would be allowed to be filled, and then effectively create kind of rectilinear building pads within the larger parcels. So you can kind of work back and forth between this more detailed map and then my kind of schematic bubble diagram.
Is this map in our package?
It is
Not, but it is in this document, which we emailed you or gave you a link to, and I'm happy to pass it around to you or print it out for you.
and it's available now on the city's webpage under this project webpage for anyone listening, viewing here.
Page 36 in the document, if you don't want to print it.
Thanks. So kind of the takeaways for me anyway were that you saw where the WQ overlay was applied, and that was along these larger drainage channels, which shown up here in kind of a light green across the area north of Clear Lake, and then through the park property. We're applying the WQ there because those two channels already serve stormwater conveyance purposes, and given that the Division of State Lands and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers get involved in wetlands regulations already, we chose to not apply local overlays to these different wetlands because at this point there's just too much uncertainty around what the DSL or U.S. The Corps is going to regulate. So if you have questions about that, why that water quality was applied here and not there, that's why.
Commissioner Duncan.
Do these wetland maps also include setback buffers? Like on the blue, does that include what would have to also be buffered from those protected wetlands?
I don't think it gets into that level of detail.
Well, there are other maps in the document, and we based our large lot bubble map off of a map that was included in the consultant's document. So we lifted those bubbles and put them on our own map. Those acreage numbers wrapped in their assumptions for protection requirements. So, yeah, I believe so, but I can double check on that as far as the setbacks.
Well, like I'm looking on the north side of Clear Lake there to the east side, and I see a large blue running north to south, and then a short ways over, it's another big blue coming down, there. So that area inside, I'm gathering it's a 10, 12, 15 acre piece. But again, is it usable as that size because of the buffering? You don't have to answer that, but
Right.
I'm gathering that there's a map in that document I hadn't looked at yet that would tell us that.
Well,
15.
that's the thinking behind these
Right.
bubbles, is that this is what we could scrape together from the constrained lands and the assumed fillable lands as developable chunks of land.
Okay.
The reason we didn't include this map in your packet or in our recommendation is that it's speculative, and so there's some risk associated with publishing this map. It's in our background documents because it's very useful for us to go through this exercise and use the wetland scientists' experience with going through joint permit applications and familiarity with what those agencies will approve. But our next steps are to meet with those agencies, show them this map, and propose this approach to them.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the next step, and we don't expect them to stamp anything approved, but we are asking for an area-wide approach and an area-wide look to this for our inventory of sites to work, because it won't work if each property owner has to go it alone. it won't add up to a whole.
Right, okay.
Commissioner
like that.
Borowski. Oh.
I think my question was answered, or part of my question was answered. I was looking at that map, and then I was looking at my bubbles, and I wanted to make sure that these bubbles fit into the white or light green areas. And what you told me is that they do. And then when you answered that question, you made me think of another one. So you said you're going to be taking that to these other agencies. Will that happen? Will their buy-in have to happen before we approve the UGB?
No, it won't. In fact, I don't think they would. They won't approve a master plan level document such as this. They're focused on there has to be a need for a project before they will review a permit application. So it's more similar to what we did in the West Eugene wetlands area than a site-by-site wetlands development permit process. And that's another conversation for another day, but the approach generally is to get buy-in on the approach and on the quality of wetlands and their location. We've already gotten their approval on the inventory, so it's kind of one step at a time. We've done the inventory. We've gotten their agreement on what wetlands meet the significance criteria. And now it's more, okay, what is Eugene as a city trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And ideally, having the agency staff recognize that we're dealing with competing goals. And we have wetlands regulations to meet and economic development objectives to achieve at the same time.
Well, and so what I'm getting to is it goes back to my defensible portion of it. And I'm concerned about that because, if we're going in and saying that this is this, and then somebody decides that they don't like our plan for UGB expansion and goes out into the middle of one of those fields and says, well, there's a wetland right smack dab in the middle of your 70 acres and that ain't going to work. So I guess, how is it defensible if it's not bought into?
That's a good question for us as we propose this approach to DLCD. So they're the decision makers on the UGB expansion, and the body that we need to work with to satisfy what the defensible nature of the proposal is. I wouldn't go so far as to say we don't care, how realistic this is, but there's a phased process. And so right now we're dealing with DLCD, we're dealing with the legitimacy of the large sites and bringing them in and meeting all of those statutes related to urban growth boundaries, while at the same time bringing with us all of this background work we've been doing on development feasibility. So unfortunately, there's not a way that I know of anyway for us to say DSL has to approve this, at this point in order for us to get it adopted. It doesn't work that way.
So and I would just add that we've heard this a couple times, and you may have also, that just simply moving the line on the UGB doesn't get us the jobs that we're talking about in this room.
Right.
So I think an important consideration is that work with DSL may come after UGB expansion, that we get the UGB expanded, and then we in this building are going to have to stay involved to actually get those jobs out there in some way, whether that's working with our colleagues in public works on wetlands mitigation or economic development planning at a regional level. There's going to be more coordination beyond just simply moving the line on the map.
We have Commissioner Jaworski, then Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, I just had a clarification question on the blue area up in the northeast section there, which runs along the main highway. When it was indicated, consultant recommends that those wetlands be protected. Is that exclusive? In other words, if you did do that, there's no access to those sites anywhere along that highway. And I'm just sort of saying, will they allow some penetration to go in through that, even though they say it should be protected? Not saying we'll take it all, we'll just take enough to get access?
So to try and clarify again, this is just the consultant's read of what would be most likely to be protected by DSL. it's not necessarily what we are recommending be protected as part of our local process. So I'd say that first. And then we've actually heard from a couple of developers, real estate professionals here in town, that they might that they would, given the industrial uses likely to be here, they don't necessarily want access on 99, that it's much easier to operate, say, off of Aubrey Street, where you can get off of the fast-moving highway and then deal with your circulation of large trucks and other equipment. Visibility is good, but not necessarily the access. But again, I think your question just points out how complicated a lot of these sites are.
Sure.
I guess my second part is, do we have to wait till there's a completed document to get these reads from
No,
on them?
no,
Or
we've
can
already
they tell
started
us-
that process.
Okay, you're already started to say,
We've started.
how does this look for wetlands even before? Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Taylor, then Commissioner Mills.
I'm okay.
Okay, Commissioner Mills.
I was just going to say, you mentioned all of the efforts that you have to make, and then we just talked about the getting a head nod, and I know this has been a difficulty in the past given the time duration, and my hope is that, we make this as formal a plan as we can and with as much interdepartmental consensus or agreement as possible, formalized agreements, so that if parcel doesn't go for 15 years and then it does go, you're not having to deal with people's memories, as I think we've had happen to us before. So I guess in my mind, I'm envisioning that we need to continue with this as a plan. Not that we're building an industrial park, but it's something of a similar kind of a mindset where we're taking this area of town and we're developing a plan for it that encompasses the schools and the parks and the traffic and the commercial needs and the employment needs. It's a plan, and the environmental needs.
Mm-hmm.
In those areas that aren't for the large-scale development, which would fit into even existing other areas in the city, which would either be campus industrial or what have you, are you going to be doing a singular, because I've heard marketing and development, are you going to be doing a singular marketing development just for this area, or is it going to be all citywide so that jobs can be placed in all those available areas that are less than the 50-plus acreage?
I'd say we focus on the whole city first, but
Okay.
that this area will take some special effort. This is a whole new area we're bringing into the city. So our obligation is to plan for all of the lands. We do have an inventory of vacant lands inside the city that are not in this area. And absolutely, we are responsible to market and develop those lands as well. This is just going to take a concerted longer-term effort to plan the infrastructure to serve the sites and see what's needed on those. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
Commissioner Borowski.
In the last slide, you talked about EJ, environmental justice, as being part of the overlay. Can you talk more as to how you see that coming into the overlay? Because that also may have impacts. I mean, we had a discussion about it, and we saw that this area was environmentally challenged, and so you just mentioned it, but you didn't say what you were thinking. So can you talk to what you're thinking as far as it being part of an overlay?
Yeah, I'll take it. One of the things we want to make sure we do is circle back with all the stakeholders that gave us the input into the EJ work thus far, and come up with a plan that recognizes the potential impacts from certain uses. And so we look at our zoning code, like Rick had his printout of the allowable uses. We've done some preliminary screening of those uses, what's allowed, what are the potential effects of those uses. And through subcommittee work and other work with our stakeholders, we want to get to, I'd say a handful, I don't know because it's not done, but a handful of uses that may require additional treatment. And by that could be procedural, such as going through site review or conditional use. And just to throw out an example so it's kind of real, let's say it's a shredder or some kind of a high-impact industrial use that's allowed in I-2. But we don't want that to happen within 1,000 feet of schools and homes and parks. So that's just an example, but it's a use that's allowed. We just want to make sure that there are siting criteria or procedural criteria that regulate it to the extent that we feel is reasonable in this area. And it's going to be subjective, but my hope is that when it gets written into the overlay, it is clear and objective, and it's supported, and it meets the goals. And the goals are to not increase health effects in this area. So we have some tools to do that.
Okay, so then, going back to that, so that at what point do we see that and the specifics of this overlay?
After it's written through subcommittee, we will bring it back to you.
But before the UGB expansion?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Mills.
Just
Were you finished, Commissioner Brodsky?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Just a quick question again for staff, and that is, this is a pretty tall order to get all of this crafted. Your gut is this is going to fit fine in an overlay format? Or are we kind of pushing the norm for what we would use an overlay for? Just your sense of it.
My sense is it's a pretty flexible tool. I think we can write in what needs to be in there, and it doesn't have to be a tome. I think it can actually be pretty streamlined. Yeah, that's my hope.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But this would be the first time that we've put EJ regulations into an overlay, is that correct?
That's correct.
Let's put them anywhere.
But we do have development regulations in all of our overlay zone in some way, shape, or form. So in that sense, it's not the justification may be new, but the tool is very familiar.
But what I'm saying, and then this goes back to my, how is it appealable, or if it goes in as this code, what you're saying is it's going to take 5 city councilors to change that at some point. So
Right.
Again, getting to Commissioner Mills, we're trying to put a lot of stuff in a short period of time that could have significant impacts years down the road. It's a tall build, so it hasn't been part of an overlay
Right.
criteria before.
So here's one example that might give you a little bit of scale. In our commercial zones currently, industrial uses are allowed with performance standards. And they limit, we don't want to go here, but they do, they limit the size of the use, they limit it to certain industrial uses, and they do not allow any uses that require a permit from LRAPA. That's why I said we don't want to go here. We wouldn't necessarily mimic that in this overlay zone.
That's an example.
It's an example of performance standards or siting criteria or whatever you want to call them, certain standards for a certain area that we do all the time in special area zones, depending on the conditions in the area. So it is a tall order, but I feel like we've made we've made a lot of outreach and a lot of gathering of information. We've got a huge head start, but you're right. We're breaking new ground with this, and hopefully, we were directed by council to do it in the first place. So, hopefully, it's what they were after when they directed us to look at it, and we'll ask them.
Commissioner Jaworski, then Commissioner Duncan.
Yeah, just to clarify for myself, this overlay, no matter what you call it or do it, is to me no different than any other overlay. And every other overlay, if you wanted to change it, would be the same type 5 appeal. But at the same time, any other overlay that's applied to a development, the developer with their attorneys has the opportunity to appeal within that overlay, and it comes through the normal processes of which we've been just working. So if that's correct, then I don't see anything that's really more significant with this as far as how do you get out of it type of thing than what exists now. Is that correct?
I mean, a code amendment's a code amendment, I guess you could say.
Okay, I just want to make sure that my mind understands that as we go along. Okay, good. Thank you.
Commissioner Duncan.
I think one of the things that happens with EJ, and Commissioner Mills has made comments to this many times, is we need to look, as we start writing this, not necessarily what's occurred poorly in the past, but there's been so much change in the way manufacturing facilities can be constructed today, even over the last decade, that we need to make sure that we're looking forward and we're not writing things into this overlay that really won't have much effect, or, because we're going to see so much change in the development in the future because of air quality, water quality, and all the other things that have to be paid attention to as manufacturers come in. So I hope as we do this, we don't say, gee, we don't want this use in here because in the past it's been a bad use, although in the future you could never do what that had done before. We need to understand what the technology and what the regulatory requirements are looking forward for these uses. So I think, in my mind, that really helps us write sort of the EJ component that will be very beneficial but not limiting from a manufacturer's standpoint.
An example of that is you mentioned an example of car crusher, and a lot of that has to do with noise. A lot of that has to do with how you engineer the attenuation of the noise. If you put it in a building, how do you do it?
So there's mitigation. There's ways to address the impact.
There are ways to address. I'm not telling you
Right.
that everything goes away. I'm just saying that, you can have standards. And so I think there's
Right.
going to have to be some careful thought. And I think I do feel we're going to be pushing the limits to the extent of a land use overlay. My sense is, because we're going to be bringing some of these other, I'm going to call them environmental issues into play, and how we're going to dictate that. It sounds like we've done that before, so it's not completely new territory, but it'll be, I expect to be educated a lot in the process, so.
I would just tack on one more comment about potential tools that get written in to take us forward, and that's the health impact assessment or other tools like it that we can partner with Lane County Public Health and bring public resources to real projects as they come. So it may not be so much a land use control that says you can't do X, Y, and Z, but it may be, if you propose certain things, let's take a look at the case-by-case basis and see what the impacts are and whether they're mitigatable.
I have everybody raising their
Okay.
hands. So I have Taylor, then Borowski, then Jaworski, then back to Mills.
I know we discussed this earlier on, and I just want to reiterate and support what Commissioner Duncan said. And actually, you just restated it. And that is, rather than look at what we don't want based on past uses, look at what we're trying to achieve and approach writing code from what is it what we want, what are the environmental justice issues or other issues, and how do we want to provide clear and objective standards to achieve what we want, and to allow that flexibility of use, which I like how you just stated it in terms of looking at potentially more context specific when it's applied for. And once again, that is obviously a challenge when we get to code writing.
Right.
Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that and just kind of say, when you mentioned, oh yeah, we've got an overlay where if it calls for a LRAPA permit, it wouldn't be permitted. Well, in the past, that may have been a bar to set, but like Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Duncan have stated, times are changing. If you've got a wood products plant that was built in the 40s, you had a wigwam. Okay, well now, if you have a wood process plant now, you might have a cogeneration plant. Well, that cogeneration plant is going to put out they're going to put out particulates, but the regulations are so much higher now that just saying if you pull a permit, you can't do it. So, I mean, would, Seneca's outside the city limits right now and outside the UGB. Would their mill and cogen plant be an allowable use here? Or would EJ prohibit that? Because
I think that's a great question to for kind of a hypothetical
Yeah.
in this location. Where could it go? How would we approach that?
Right.
It is an I2.
Because that's a real world. That's
Yeah.
a real world 21st
Yeah.
century
Yep.
plant that was built, and there are people on both sides of that.
Right.
There's people from beyond toxic that think the particulates are too high, and there's people, on the other side of the fence that say, "Hey, we're building a state-of-the-art facility here, and we want to be a good neighbor." So perhaps run that one through, because it's right across the street from where we're at. It's a real world potential type of a use.
Commissioner Jaworski.
And just fortunate in the sequence, it's sort of a flow. I wanted to bring up the similar issue on environmental justice. When you took a look at what all the emitters were on other maps and what's happening to this area, and it's one thing to say what can go on in this area and how you'll look at it and code-wise, and also it's been brought up by a lot of commissioners, the increase in technology means things are going to be better than what they were. But to me, the bottom line is even though standards are adjusted or not, someone is granted a license to release so much particulates in the air or whatever. And I don't know how drastically that changes, but there's a certain effect on that. And so I'm just throwing this out. Is there any way, because I think someone had said we want to see about how we can improve this area. It's kind of an interesting thought. So to improve this area, besides new technologies replacing what's existing, isn't there also a way to say that if you have someone coming in and they're granted a license and it's 500x that they can emit, and they say, well, I'll tell you what, even with that, we're only going to emit 60% of that you have some sort of incentive program for doing something like that and making the area better. This is something I think that should be considered. Thank you.
Great idea.
Commissioner Mills.
Pass.
Yeah, one more thing.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So you mentioned earlier that until annexation, the county approves this zone overlay, right?
The opposite. That as soon as the UGB line is expanded,
Right.
all land use and zoning responsibilities fall upon the city for this area,
Right.
Before annexation.
So
regardless of annexation.
So the question is does the county have to buy in on the EJ overlay, or what?
Yes. The Clear Lake overlay and the WQ actually both have to be adopted into what I mentioned earlier, the UTA, the Urban Transition Area Code, which is a county-adopted document that we, the city, implement. So they will have to adopt both those regulatory tools.
So then my question is, have you had conversations with the county that you're thinking of putting EJ as part of that overlay? Because
we have. We've had a commissioner and staff involved in the focus group meetings. We haven't given our update yet to the board, but it's part of the process. So in particular, Commissioner Farr has attended and is on board with the planning that we're doing in this area.
Thank you.
Does that give you input for
Plenty.
from us?
Plenty.
Okay.
No, that's good. I did want to mention the property owners that are here again. If we end the meeting early, maybe we can chat afterwards if any of you have questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. I see Commissioner Duncan's.
Isn't there another group forming out in ABC? Greg Evans is involved, Councilor Evans.
Yes.
A group that's trying to promote sort
Economic development.
economic development in that area?
Yeah, Zach's been on that committee. Do you want to
Okay.
talk about that a little?
They've been, that is correct. They are kind of a burgeoning group of local business owners, school board members, and a few counselors and commissioners from the Board of County Commissioners. Pat Farr's there as the representative from that area. Their focus has been very specifically on Highway 99 corridor and what can be done to redevelop that, and then they're aware of the urban growth boundary expansion and are generally supportive of that. I think it's a bit abstract because it's so long term. They understand that moving the line doesn't get you a lot immediately, and therefore they are much more focused on any sort of redevelopment on the 99, which would be shorter term. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, Terry and Zach, and look forward to seeing where all this goes.
Thank you.
With that, last item on our agenda is items from commission and staff. Are there any other items from staff?
Not at this time.
Okay.
What's on our plate for coming up?
Oh, let's see. Next week we'll be talking about South Willamette.
Okay.
And
That will be our last South Willamette discussion.
Not forever.
Pardon me?
Not forever, though.
Not
right?
forever, no.
Yeah,
Just for this
particular
particular phase of it, before it actually goes to, I think, the code writing and public comment.
Correct. Yep.
And so I would encourage the commission to go back and review the items that we've not yet covered, which I think were the single-family options and design review, if I'm remembering right, Robin?
Yeah, I think those are the biggest topics.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because we'll need to approach those efficiently.
Okay.
Sorry, I kind of interrupted you.
No.
Yeah, no, that's it.
But that's, I think, the next item on our agenda.
And then is there anything going in front of council in the next month that planning commissioners should be aware of?
Well, let's see. The only thing that you're already aware of are the Metro Plan amendments, of course. Those are going to go out for public hearing and action here coming up the next couple of weeks. I think next week is the public hearing, I believe. And then the following week, I think, is action. Is that correct? November 24th. Okay.
There's a meeting coming up on residential expansion at the end of November.
Okay. And what's the date on that one? Do you remember?
November 24th.
November
You have a
24th.
meeting
Yeah.
with Alyssa presenting residential expansion analysis. And it might be good timing. I wrote up on the slide, next steps for you on this project are some subcommittee, 1 or 2 meetings. And then Commissioner Borowski asked, are you going to bring us back the overlay? So around the beginning of December, I'm not sure about your meeting timing, but we'll either bring you that in a meeting or write you a memo or something. We'll figure out the best way to do that, to bring it to you before we present it to the council in early December.
Commissioner Duncan?
And maybe we're going to deal with this in subcommittee, but as we move forward on the Clear Lake area, the overlay work, and sort of how to write code for the large lots, I'm assuming somewhere else in this country, other jurisdictions have tried to do that or have done that. If you ever come across any websites or links that you can send to us, I'd love to take a look at other code work.
Research.
What everybody else has tried to do, because stealing's the best thing when it comes to this. We don't need to write it all new if we can find a good one to modify.
Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, if I understand this chart on, I don't know if the light color means directions for adoption by the City Council on January 28th. Is that correct? What does that mean?
That is another work session, and it's an opportunity for the City Council to provide direction to staff on the adoption package. So it's
And then that all comes back again through the
through
Planning
public
Commission.
hearings, exactly.
How about the Planning Commission?
Yes.
Okay.
But both planning commissions, county and city, and both Board of Commissioners and City Council hearings.
And that
Public hearing would be a joint public hearing with
Yes.
us and the county? Okay.
Yeah.
Just to add in there, as far as the Planning Commission schedule goes, Terry mentioned the residential expansion analysis that Alyssa will bring to you on the 24th. We may have time for another discussion on that the following week. And then after that, we actually have the Envision Eugene Plan Comprehensive Plan, which Carolyn will bring to you and have a conversation about that following that. So really, we're in the thick of preparing for the UGB and comp plan work that's going to head through you and then to council.
Can we get an up-to-date calendar? I don't think we've received one in a few weeks.
24th,
The tentative schedule?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thanks.
There's one on the 17th.
They're going to send out another one. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, find the gavel. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
That's 2 weeks in a row.
I know. I find